I drank some alcohol earlier, but it had been about an hour since I drank anything except orange juice, which I only drank a couple drinks of. I took one hit of JWH-018 at about 6:30 a.m. I had been smoking about 2 milligrams of JWH before bed for about 2 weeks because it was helping me sleep. In fact, sometimes I get these nap attacks where I will fall asleep sitting up after smoking this. Then I will wake up a few minutes later and then it will happen again. It wasn't like this was my first hit. This was the first time I had used a pizzo-style pipe, oil-based pipe, to smoke it. I felt a slight burn in my throat and a tiny bit of taste. I held it in and then blew it out, and the smoke from it was as thick as if I was smoking weed. I had never seen this much smoke from JWH-018 before, and in fact, there is usually very little smoke and there has never been a burn or taste to the JWH. I had just poured a drink, Jack Daniel's a Diet Coke, but I only drank a couple because of what happened next. About 15 minutes later, I felt really brain high, and I just kept getting higher and higher on the same hit. I never took another one. I started getting scared because I felt too high. My heart was racing, pounding, and actually ached. Things sort of felt hazy. I had my friend sit in front of me and I put my hand on his arm so I could feel something real, and I closed my eyes and took deep, slow breaths to try and calm my body down. It didn't work, so I just laid down. I became paranoid, like something was going to happen and I wasn't going to be able to handle it because I was so high. That probably all took about 10 minutes, so it must have been just before 7 a.m. when I started throwing up. I didn't make it to the bathroom first, and then I had to run before I fell because I was so weak and I was going to throw up more. I made it to the toilet and started violently throwing up. It was so violent that my entire body was straining to throw up, not just my stomach. The entire time I was throwing up, my whole body was uncontrollably twitching. It was about one twitch every 10 to 15 seconds. Not a leg or a body part, my entire body was doing it. I was so weak and out of it that I could barely reach my arm over my head and flush the toilet 2 times. I hardly lifted my head up at all. My friend had thought I threw up blood. I was throwing up so hard. The only full sentence I actually got out was, "Should I go to the hospital?" I was scared to death. My friend told me it wasn't blood, that I was okay. I was just throwing up, and he was right. I was trying to think myself through this. My friend reminded me that it was only supposed to last 2 hours, and I tried using that as a way to calm myself down. Mind you, I'm still throwing up violently. Then, my mouth got so dry and so did my throat. I seriously had no saliva left and couldn't produce any despite trying to. This actually made things worse. I was throwing up only food, no fluid, and because my throat was so dry, like someone wiped it out with Kleenex, the food would get stuck in my throat and I choked twice so hard I almost passed out. I had to fight to utter the word water to my friend. Normally you don't want to drink water because it makes you throw up, but I needed moisture to help the food slide out. I know that's gross, but it's the truth. I couldn't pull myself up to the sink to get my own water, and I almost used the clean water in the toilet to moisten my mouth. That's how bad it was. I was still throwing up when I got a text message from my daughter around 7:45 and I couldn't answer it. My friend asked me what I wanted him to do like 3 times and I couldn't say anything. Finally, all I could barely say was, "Take care of it, please," and I could hardly say it loud enough to hear and never lifted my head up to say it. It was like my head couldn't move and talking took too much thought. About 15 minutes later, I finally thought I was stopping throwing up and started lowering myself to the floor because I couldn't stand or crawl. I thought I was just going to collapse backwards when I brought my head up from the toilet, so I hung onto the toilet and lowered myself, but as I was going down, I realized I wasn't done. I threw up more and then was able to lower myself down onto the floor, and I was so happy to feel something besides the toilet and that I was done throwing up. The body twitching had slowed down too, but I was still unable to utter any words. I guess I fell asleep on the floor because my friend was going to move me to the bed, but realized that I'd thrown up again, but I didn't know it. This wasn't a violent throw up because he said I made no noise at all. He said it was still dry, no fluid. Thankfully, I was on my side when I threw up. He cleaned it up and woke me to see if I wanted to go to bed. I didn't want him to have to move me, so I mustered my jelly-like arms to hold me up and crawled a few feet before I had to lay down again. This happened a few times. I'd crawl and lay down for a bit, still not talking out loud. I had to talk myself into doing it. Finally, I was at the foot of the bed and I threw myself up onto it and to the pillows. I laid there and then I got a chill or something because I got severe uncontrollable shivers, not just twitching. My body was shaking and twitching so hard I couldn't control it. After my friend put blankets over me because I said cold, it wasn't as bad. My body slowed down and I finally fell asleep. This was probably about 8:20 or so. I got about 4 hours of sleep, stayed up for about 3 hours, then slept for 2 more, so about 5 p.m. I went down to eat. The rest of the day I was able to function, but it wasn't until after 6 p.m. that I actually felt normal and felt like I was in the real world. I remember eating dinner and I felt like I was in a dream even though I was talking to real people. It was weird. I can tell you that I don't know what I would have done if I was alone because simple things like a human touch on my shoulder, my friend's voice, and him saying things like, "You know you are throwing up, but you are not sick. You are going to be okay," and "It's not cold, you're okay," made me know I was still there. It gave me something to fight with in my mind so I could try and stay calm and not think I was going to die. I seriously thought that I could die while this was happening, and I have never felt that way in my life, and I'm middle-aged. If this happens to you, talk yourself through it. It did go away and there were no residual effects. If you are with a friend that is going through this, make sure they hear you and feel you. Reality makes it easier to get through. Another friend of mine took too much and he was given 500 milligrams of paracetam to take, but only took 250 milligrams of it by insufflating it. He felt much better but still threw up. Another friend took paracetam the same way, but 500 milligrams, and it was like he was completely sober. I personally will not be caught without paracetam in case it happens again. I wish I knew of it before my incident. I tried this 2 nights in a row, and it was a repeated and varied experience every time. First night, the time was about 6:30 p.m. I loaded a bong and ripped it all in one hit. I held it in for roughly 45 seconds and then blew it out. It hit instantly. I was pretty high even before I exhaled. I laid down in bed and put on Wonderland dubstep mix by Mad Alice. I laid down and thought, wow, I am really high, and closed my eyes. I started seeing visuals, mainly pulses and waves in tune with the music. I had a super body high. I listened to all the ambient noise and remarked how often we passed it off as white noise in daily life. That's roughly where things got trippy and bad. The only way I can describe what I felt is as follows. My mind and body sank into my bed and I lost the feeling of my body. I could not bring words to the thoughts in my head, so they became a basis of pure emotional reaction. Basically, my mind became a torrent of emotion and it was not a pleasant feeling. Every emotion was amplified 100 times, and it was all reactions like in a computer where I experienced every mix of every emotion all at the same time. And the reaction to the different emotional mixes became their own entities, and then my emotions mixed with those reactions made more and more entities of emotional reactions, and they were blurring together, and thousands of thoughts and feelings flew through my head at 1,000 times a second. Being dissociated from my body, my basis for a self was being thrown and hurtled through these reactions and calculations, and I was being flung through consciousness in a very disorienting and unpleasant way. Eventually, after what felt like hours, this subsided, and I was able to form conscious thoughts, and immediately I thought, I am way too fucked up. So I put in eye drops and stashed the rest of the JWH I had. I sat down next to my phone, which was still playing music, and I was barely capable of physical movement, and I picked up my phone realizing the music was far too loud and it was making me feel nauseous. The same song was on and it was almost over, so I turned it off and laid down and shut my eyes. I woke up sober about 25 minutes later. Trial 2. Later that night before I took a shower, I loaded up a bong and smoked it. I held it in for about 30 seconds and then exhaled. This time I turned on some music I thought was a bit calmer, hoping for better results. I listened to Crystallize by Lindsey Sterling and then stood in the shower, rapidly becoming very high again. Initially I was afraid I was going to become too high again and have a bad trip, but I simply became entranced with the music and the beauty of it. I got lost in thought focusing on the music, and I felt myself become one entity fused with it, and I was reminded of the cold setting of the music video and pondered why I was so warm before remembering I was in the shower. I started having auditory hallucinations, thinking people were beating on the door and yelling at me. I felt like everyone in my house knew I was high and were very angry. Eventually I got over this and I sat down for the remainder of the high, which lasted about another 20 minutes. When I got out of the shower, still slightly buzzed from the JWH, I looked in the mirror to see how obvious it was that I was high, and I remarked that I looked like a really chill pirate, but not at all stoned, and was satisfied before I went to my room. Trial 3. I wanted to watch a movie or cartoons on the JWH to see how it would affect me. I loaded some into a cigar tip and smoked it all in about 2 hits, holding in each for about 30 seconds. It became difficult to walk and I stumbled to my bed and collapsed. I stared at my computer and I began fighting with my subconscious, which had become an external entity, and I was mentally yelling at it to pick a movie because I was far too stoned to move my hand and hit the mouse button to pick one. I remember hitting my laptop attempting to select a movie, but one never came. Eventually, I just laid my head down and stared at the blank computer screen before again succumbing to my emotional torrents and mindlessness. After some time, I was still locked into this phase, but I retained my internal verbal abilities, so I started arguing with my self-conscious and telling it I was an idiot. Later, I remarked to myself that I was on SSRIs and that a mix of any chemical that releases serotonin, such as JWH, is a terrible idea and that I could very well die there tonight. I didn't, sadly. Trial 4. The next morning, I was alone and I decided, fuck my self-conscious, I'm gonna lose my mind today. So I loaded a bunch into a blunt. It was about 5 hits and I held them all in as long as I could. I don't remember much of the last 2 hits as I was already incredibly high. I remember attempting to make it back to my bed from the window and then I blacked out. When I came to, I was still very much under the influence and someone was standing next to me screaming at me. I looked into their face and thought that I should recognize this person and realized they were yelling things at me, but they looked totally foreign and were making no noise. My brain had locked out external sounds and was instead producing its own noise, and it sounded like an incredibly loud roar. I didn't know what was going on and I couldn't see straight. I sank into my emotional torrent and blacked out again. When I came to again, someone was holding my eyelids open screaming at me to stay with them and keep my eyes open. I looked down and noticed that about 6 people I didn't know were stretching me out, and I felt like I was a mile long. Then immediately I realized I was curled into a ball very tight and was shaking radically and frantically. So I tried to relax and felt myself become stretched out again and blacked out again. I came to as someone picked me up and stuck me in a wheelchair and then blacked out, coming to again, waking up on a stretcher in an ambulance. Someone yelled that I was still with them, and then I realized that the people around me were paramedics. They started shouting questions at me, and I had no clue what the words they were saying meant. I had lost the ability to understand language. I looked down and realized I had IVs in me and was hooked up to a bunch of monitors. Someone stuck a needle in me, and I blacked out again. I woke up in the ambulance still and heard the words, "Need more Valium," before blacking out again. I woke up 6 hours later in a hospital and had a seizure that lasted almost 30 minutes, and the paramedics had to take me to the hospital. I almost had to be air flighted. All in all, honestly, I would totally recommend JWH. I like getting fucked up, and I simply went too far. JWH is very fucking strong. It has been 6 months of abusing, and all I can say now is why did I ever even try it? At first, it was awesome to be able to get high again. How true my thoughts of how this was too good to be true would come to be. I started off with low doses, and I was lucky, or maybe not so lucky now that I look back on it, to not have a negative experience at first. I made my own blend, marshmallow leaf and JWH-018, and it was just like being able to smoke cannabis again. The problem was, I was enjoying it too much, 8 to 10 times a day, every day, just as I did with cannabis. I wasn't experiencing negative effects, in fact, positive effects. I wasn't tired like with cannabis. I didn't get the munchies. I wasn't having trouble eating, sleeping, or functioning. It was awesome. It was bliss. After the first couple months, I started walking in the night with urges to get up and smoke. I wouldn't allow myself to do this because I knew it was signs of addictions coming on. Like everyone else, my tolerance skyrocketed, another sign of addiction. I was smoking the herb blend, and at first, one hit was just right. Then it would take 2 hits, then 4 hits, then 6. I stopped the herb and went back to the powder because it was just taking too much. It was taking too much time to get high, and it smelled so I couldn't do it anywhere. I thought that I would buy more and make a stronger batch to accommodate for my tolerance buildup. Smoking amounts 10 to 20 times the size of when I first started. I was smoking in bathrooms, in my car, at home with others around. Because there was no smell and nobody noticed. I bought 5 more grams with the intention of making a stronger blend. I just kept smoking the powder though. I figured that if I did make a stronger batch, it would just be a matter of time before it would become ineffective. Higher and higher doses each time. I was still maintaining myself so far, and I wasn't allowing myself to recognize that I might be acquiring a seriously dangerous habit. I wasn't having negative effects. So this went on up until a few weeks ago. I started realizing I couldn't function unless I smoked. I would wake up and I would smoke until I was nervous, agitated, and cranky. By the end of the day, I would be going to bed early. I was noticing that doses in the morning were stronger than doses in the evening. About a month ago, I read a post about effects and related to someone saying that their interests and hobbies were going away. I wasn't noticing it until I read it, and it was probably the first real big light inside my head that said, what the fuck? I started to become extremely tired after dosing, to the point that I had to nap. It got to the point that I would smoke in the morning, smoking again mid-morning, and by lunch, sneaking away to take a nap for 2 hours. Not good. Over the weekend, it was smoke, veg, sleep, wake, repeat. I loved it, but I knew it wasn't healthy for me. So feeling sleepy was getting worse, but I can handle it. It will get better. I can handle it. It will get better. I can handle it. I can handle it. Yeah, right. A couple weeks ago, I started noticing that I was having trouble eating. I would be hungry, and I would sit down to eat, and after the first bite, I would just lose my appetite. At first, I would be able to forcibly finish the meal, but as time went on, it just got harder and harder, to the point I would eat what I could just to get some sustenance in my stomach. For the past 2 weeks, this has been going on, along with diarrhea, and I compare it to meth abuse in that I just don't want to eat. I hoped it would go away, but it hasn't. For the past week, I've been eating once a day, and maybe 10 ounces of food. Along with this has come the shakes, fogginess, short-term memory dysfunction, and agitation. I have lost some weight, which is good, but this is not a healthy way to do so, and I think I am constantly dehydrated. Monday, I told myself I have a problem and need to stop, continue to smoke all day, feelings of guilt and fear that I can't stop. How did I get myself into this? Tuesday, smoked in the morning after dueling it out with my better half and felt like shit the rest of the day. Shakes, fogginess, nausea, agitation, and chills. Smoked at lunch and felt a little better, but still couldn't eat. Smoked again before bed so I would fall asleep. At least I was able to cut back and wasn't just giving in. This sucks big time. Wednesday, I woke up and after fighting the urge, I smoked a little bit. I felt like shit, the shakes, fogginess, feelings of will I make it through this. I didn't smoke the rest of the day except for 1 hit. The single hit did help, but certainly didn't last. When I got home from work, I passed out and woke a couple times in the night. I puked one of those times. Luckily, I was able to fall back asleep. Thursday, same feelings of complete shit, but worse. I couldn't call out sick, I had to go to work. It was a tremendous struggle to make it through the day. Coworkers were telling me I didn't look good and that I should go home. I made it through this day without smoking once, which I can't believe I did. When I got home, I wanted to smoke so much, but I kept telling myself that I'm in some serious shit and I need to pull myself out. If I smoke, I won't get through this. I didn't think I would be able to sleep. I laid down at 9 and tossed and turned. I was able to fall asleep, but I would wake up every hour. Midnight, I got up and smoked a cig and went back to bed. 2 a.m. got up and went to the bathroom. 3 a.m. got up and had a horrible muscle spasm in my leg. It lasted about 10 minutes. I haven't had one of those in over 10 years. I got up and smoked a cig, slept until 5, and tossed and turned until I got up at 6. Friday, feeling a little better than yesterday, but still the same feelings, just not as intense. Some are coming and going. I didn't smoke this morning, but I brought it with me. I hope I can stay away from it all day today. I might actually be able to eat a lunch today. I might actually feel a little better this afternoon if I can eat something. So this is where I'm at currently. The past 2 weekends was nothing but smoke, veg, sleep, repeat. This weekend is going to be tough for me. Maybe I should flush what I have left. I'm going to try and lick the first because I would still love to be able to partake 1 to 2 times per week. I just can't let my fiendish self take over again. I am guessing anyone that has ever gone through withdrawals are laughing at what I just wrote. This is my first time with them, never had them with cannabis. I had similar feelings with other drugs, but I was never able to partake in them for a long enough period of time to have serious withdrawals because of access and mainly money. I don't have this with JWH-018, and it scares me big time. I thought it was going to get scheduled and began to think I don't have a choice in quitting, but the DEA has not taken the official step to schedule them yet. I wouldn't wish what I am going through on anybody, either moderation or stay away from it. I can't honestly say if I will be able to use in moderation. If not, it was an experience that I will be glad is behind me. One day during the summer, me and a few of my friends decided to get together and hang out one night while my parents were away. I knew they would be gone for the evening, but not sure when that night they would be back. So around 5, my friends get here, one of them with a bag of JWH. We get all the supplies together and go into the forest back behind my house. We had one joint packed very tightly that 4 out of the 6 guys there shared. The 2 that didn't smoke, it was for supervisional purposes. Most of us, including myself, had smoked JWH before, so we knew what we were doing. After 2 very big hits, everything began to slow down. I felt the urge to be very quiet. As the high kicks in, we begin walking back to my house. The walk, in reality, took probably 3 minutes. However, it felt like an hour. As we get close to my house, my friend, who had taken an equal amount of JWH, begins telling me he doesn't feel good and needs to lie down. He repeatedly told me he had to lie down or else he was going to die. He was obviously having a bad trip. My high had now fully hit me, and my friend's panic began to put me into a panic. I remember thinking, if he dies, I'm killing myself. As I sat on a couch watching my friend rock back and forth crying into a pillow, I began to hear my mom's voice. This was one of the scariest moments of my life. I was so scared I would face my parents in the state that I was in. I kept hearing my mom scream my name, but no one else in the room seemed to be deterred. I even asked one of the sober kids that was there if he heard anything. He said no. My heart began to pound so hard inside my chest, I thought it was going to explode and I was going to die. I had just this overall panic that any second my parents would come in, they would see what was going on and kill me. I decided it would be best if I just told everyone goodbye and went off to bed and died. I remember lying down and still being aware of the fact that I was conscious. I felt like I had been lying down dead for hours, my friend still rocking, crying in a pillow. After about 2 hours of panic, my friends finally decide we all leave the house just in case someone comes home. By this time, I was basically sobered up. Let me just say, those were the worst 2 hours of my life, and I will never touch it again. I do not recommend this to anyone. It is awful.